Rumors. Let's use this Memorial Day Locked On Pacers podcast to talk about them with the Pacers, specifically two players who have connected to the Pacers this offseason, Deandre Ayton and Russell Westbrook. Do they make sense as acquisitions for the Pacers? Where's this all coming from? Where's this story could be headed? I'll break it all down for you guys today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers, as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today we're doing something I hate because things have gotten out of control. It is Rumors Day. We're talking NBA rumors connected to the Pacers this offseason, and in particular, two of them that there's been a lot of buzz around and people ask about that I want to talk about all the available information and cap situation, everything that makes sense and heads into these situations surrounding two players, Deandre Ayton, set to be a restricted free agent, and Russell Westbrook, as it relates to the Indiana Pacers. Thank you, as always, for listening to Locked On Pacers and making it your first listen every day. We are free and available on our platform, all platforms. What we're going to do today is cut through this Deandre Ayton stuff and then talk about Russell Westbrook at the end, because this Ayton stuff's getting a little out of hand to me. A lot of discussion about Ayton to the Pacers that I see on the internet. A lot of people have asked me about it, and a lot of the discussions about it, quite frankly, do not make sense to me. So let's cut through and figure it out. So let's go back in time first, because this story requires a lot of background. So if you'll recall, right after the trade deadline, it came from a lot of people, some Suns insiders, Zach Lowe, and I heard it even in passing, which if I heard it, that means it was pretty real. The Pacers and Suns did have talks about an Ayton deal with Sabonis involved, and the Halliburton trade completely nixed that because Halliburton's better. But, Zach Lowe's piece in ESPN, for example, says the Pacers and Phoenix Suns had a brief dialogue around Sabonis and Deandre Ayton. Multiple sources say it did not get far, and it may have been mostly informal and broadly exploratory and aimed at the future rather than anything now. No formal offer was ever made by either side. And then he says it's notable that the Suns didn't immediately hang up the phone. So that's the start of this Ayton Pacers connection. That trade did not happen, and now Ayton cannot be traded until July 1st. He will be a restricted free agent starting July 1, meaning the Suns can match any offer that a team decides to make for him. So that is how we got here, is that deadline talk. There has not been anything connecting the two this offseason, which I think is noteworthy because a lot of people are rushing to say that, this makes a lot of sense. And I'll cut through it in a second, but I have not really, thought that there's been anything out there in terms of connecting them because Sabonis is now not with the Pacers, and that could have been a big part of all this. That said, let's cut through this and figure it all out, because there's a lot going on here. Ayton is good and young, but the talks have kind of been reignited by like Bill Simmons suggesting that Ayton could still be shopped this summer, and a lot of Suns insiders just discussing what his future could be. And the Suns could match any offer he has, but for a team that has Mikal Bridges expensive, Devin Booker is Supermax eligible, Chris Paul's expensive, they've got some other young guys they would like to pay. Could be very expensive for that team to keep DeAndre Ayton, especially on the max deal that he would like to get. So let's cut through this and figure it out, because I think that the first part of this that's important is something Zach Lowe noted that is true for a lot of transactions in the NBA. Like, sometimes trade calls can be like long-term igniters for deals, like setting the scene for something else that could happen. And so, the fact that the Pacers and Suns potentially had this discussion shows the Pacers may in fact have interest in DeAndre Ayton, or may have at the time at least saw him as a good fit for a Sabonis trade. Now, the other factor here is Sabonis is gone, right? He is no longer a trade candidate in this piece. So now the Suns, who obviously don't want to lose Ayton for nothing, would have to potentially decide if they want to get stuff from the Pacers in return for him, or they could decide to lose him for nothing because of their cap situation. So they have a lot at stake here, because now they don't have the option of trading him on his cheapo contract. They would have to sign and trade him to get rid of it. So the fact that Sabonis is no longer on the Pacers is an extremely relevant part of this to me. The other factor is a sign and trade means there's something called base year compensation involved, and the Suns can't take back more than like 18, 19 million in the deal. I haven't done all the calculations. Not as much as his max, which for Ayton this summer projects to be about $30.5 million. Probably a little more than that because BRI will likely go up thanks to the strong playoffs. So that is where the background of the situation is, right? The Pacers had exploratory talks before. It didn't go anywhere. And now we're here in the offseason where Ayton's going to be a free agent, and either he can sign with any team. The Suns, if they make him a restricted free agent, can match any deal, but there could be sign and trade involved because there's not a lot of cap space around the league. So the troubling part here is with all these things is, Jake Fisher, for example, NBA insider for Bleacher Report, wrote a piece about Ayton and teams that seem like they will be the potential Deandre Ayton suitors. Did not list Indiana, Atlanta, Detroit, Portland, right? And that makes sense. Those are the three teams he listed. Those make sense to me. They have strong space, or in Atlanta's case, have strong young pieces, are really ready to make the big jump forward from where they were last year. Detroit, I guess a little less, but Atlanta and Portland certainly, right? And the Pacers maybe want to make a big jump forward. But to me, this is not the summer to do it, even if they do have a lot of cap space. But this is where it gets tricky because, if there are other teams that want him, he will be worth the max. So the Suns will have to decide if they want to match that. But do the Pacers want to pay DeAndre Ayton the max? If so, this is their team, right? They are Halliburton, Duarte, DeAndre Ayton as their core. But anyway, even if you think he is or isn't worth the max, and I'm on the side of no, I think he's pretty damn good. Like I do think DeAndre Ayton's a good player. His playoff run in 2021-22 was amazing, right? He was fantastic that year for the Suns. Big part of the reason they made the finals and almost won it all. This year, not as good. Obviously had a riff internally, per some comments made by Monty Williams, the Suns head coach. So it's harder to say what his future holds. I don't know. Like guys without a ton of ability to stretch and some defensive limitations, despite being extremely bouncy and incredibly good finishers. Like DeAndre Ayton's awesome, but I don't think he's a max guy at his position. That said, that doesn't matter. Does it make sense for the Pacers to pursue him this summer? And I think that comes down to your evaluation of Ayton, but two, if you think it's worth potentially signing and trading. But there's a lot to cut through with that sign and trade stuff because I don't get why it has to be a sign and trade. I think that a lot of the coverage around this has been the Pacers are going to have to send the Suns stuff to get this guy, and I don't really get why that's the case. Because, like I said earlier, there's this rule called base year compensation involved. The Suns can only take back $18 million. So a lot of the floating has been like Miles Turner for DeAndre Ayton. And some people, on the Sun side have said, well, maybe, a draft pick would have to be involved, or like a guy like Chris Duarte would have to be involved. I've seen that from the Pacers coverage before even, which is strange to me. I don't get this at all, right? If you're the Pacers, you can get to $30 million of cap space so easily. You just cut all your cap holds and you're close. Then you just, you've wave and stretch Goga Batadze, bam. You have max cap space. Why would the Pacers sign and trade for DeAndre Ayton when they could just sign DeAndre Ayton? Why would the Pacers give up Miles Turner for DeAndre Ayton when they could just cut Goga and stretch his contract and then maybe waive one other minimum guy and sign DeAndre Ayton? That's why a lot of this rumor stuff doesn't make sense to me. It's not baked in reality, and that's why I have to talk about all the sides of these stories because none of these deals make sense to me. None of the rumors make sense. None of the rules preventing this stuff. For example, if you see something floated from someone who claims to be an insider that says that the Pacers would be interested in trading the 6th pick in a deal for DeAndre Ayton, immediately know that's false. That's tampering. How are the Suns going to know what they're willing to trade DeAndre Ayton for before they sign him to a deal? Like, obviously they know. Teams tamper. Teams do this stuff. But, the NBA just got 3 teams in the last 2 years in trouble. Bucks, Bulls, and the Heat have all been axed draft picks for tampering. If the 6th pick comes before free agency, I guess they know the salary slot, but the Suns can't know, air quotes, who the player picked is going to be at the time of the draft. And so at the time of the draft, they can't trade Ayton at all. And after free agency starts, the 6th pick's already been made. So that is not something that is allowed. That's tampering. Deciding on a sign and trade like that is not allowed. So anytime you hear that, I mean, maybe it's something they talk about, but that's not legal, right? So there's not a lot that makes sense to me in these discussions. So I want to cut through it and figure out what does make sense. How does this make sense? Do the Pacers actually want Ayton? Could he be a guy they pursue? And why Malcolm Brogdon signing is actually very relevant in this discussion for me. So before I cut through it a little deeper, especially with the cap stuff and the trade stuff, I got to tell you guys about BetOnline.net. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports development, including this year's basketball playoffs. We have reached the NBA Finals, Major League Baseball scores, futures, fights, next season NFL odds, all that and more, all over at betonline.net. For example, they got Finals Game 1 lineup. Golden State favored by 3.5 in Game 1 on June 2nd. Super looking forward to that. I'm sad. I'm not ashamed that it's so far away. And BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. Head over to that website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NBA Big Board to hear more about the latest draft prospects in this draft. Huge draft for the Pacers. We'll get some more draft coverage later this week, including talks on Jaden Ivey, one of my favorite prospects in this draft. So I just briefly talked about an Ayton sign and trade, and I want to cut into that a little more because the biggest reason I don't get it has to do with resources, right? And that's kind of what I just explained. The Suns can only take back up to, I should know the number off the top of my head a little bit better, but it's like 18-ish million, 18 to 20 million in a sign and trade for Ayton because of a rule called base year compensation, like I said. So they can't take back, up to 30 million in salary. Matching salaries is much harder in this deal. And that makes the Pacers sort of appealing if you're the Suns, if you are considering a sign and trade, because they have cap space. So they don't have to take back equivalent salary to what they send out, which makes salary matching a little easier on their end. That said, again, I don't get it. So the machinations here, I just kind of explained it, but the Pacers, if they slash all their cap holds, can get close to 30 million space. And then if they, for example, if they waive Goga Bitadze in his $4.7 million deal and stretch it, then it becomes 1.5 million over 3 years. So they just save 3 million cap space right off the top. And then they could decline O'Shea Brissett's team option to save up a little cap room, or waive Terry Taylor, or waive Dwayne Washington and free up a little more. And by doing that, they would get up to max space, right? So you, listener at home, or anyone who's listening, right, think about it. If you're the Pacers, what would you rather do to get Deandre Ayton? Trade Miles Turner and potentially some other asset stuff, because the Suns probably want more than that, or just cut 2 bench players? Like, obviously they're going to do that. That makes more sense for the Pacers. So if the Suns are willing to match up to the max, then yeah, you have to do a sign and trade to get the guy. But if the Suns are willing to match up to the max, you're not going to get him, right? Unless, Ayton's better than what they'd get from the Pacers. So that's why it doesn't make sense to me. Why would they want to do a sign and trade to get worse stuff if they're willing to keep the guy? And if they're not willing to keep the guy, why are the Pacers rushing in to trade all this stuff for DeAndre Ayton? That doesn't make sense to me. So to me, if you're the Pacers, the asset resource thing to do is, if you get any intel that you can get Ayton without having to trade, right? If the trade deadline, it's better for the Pacers to do it then, because then they get Ayton in restricted free agency. And if they're willing to pay him the max, great. They already have him on the team. They can just do it. So if they're willing to do that now, again, I wouldn't, but if they're willing to now, they don't have to do all these sign and trade hurdles. That doesn't make sense. They could just cut 2 dudes and stretch Goga and they're there. Or even just trade someone into space. Like, there are so many ways to go about this. It makes me feel like I'm going crazy reading some of the coverage about this, because it makes the Pacers seem like they're just handing stuff to Phoenix, and they have to do something to get him if the Suns are going to match, but the Suns are going to be expensive. And there's a reason that they're in this position in the first place. They didn't play Ayton a ton. They didn't give him the max extension last summer after 3 years of his rookie contract. They've kind of gotten themselves here. So all this to say, a lot of this is going to come down to the Suns' desires. If the Suns are willing to match up to the max, I don't think there's any way the Pacers get DeAndre Ayton this summer. And if the Suns aren't willing to match up to the max, I don't get why this has to be a sign and trade. But I have to bring something up that I think is endlessly fascinating in this discussion. The last time the Pacers acquired a player who was a restricted free agent in the offseason, do you remember, listener? That player was Malcolm Brogdon. He's still on the team. He was a restricted free agent with the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Pacers wanted to sign him. And as the reporting has it from Brian Windhorst, Herb Simon got involved, calls the Bucks ownership and says, I want this to happen, but it's a restricted free agency. This sucks. How can we make this happen without you guys matching the deal? And so what it happened to be was a sign and trade. This sounds familiar, the Ayton situation. So Brogdon goes to Indiana, no salary in return, straight into the Pacers cap space for a first-round pick and I think 2 seconds or something like that, or a second and a swap or some second-round swap or something. I don't know. A first and a second, basically. Right? That was what went to Indiana in that deal. So, precedent here. Pacers getting restricted free agent. They give up stuff to do it. So I think that is noteworthy, because if, let's say, the Suns aren't willing to match up to the max, but Herb Simon's like, well, I still hate this restricted free agency thing. I hate, helping other owners get involved. And Kevin Pritchard even said it on the record after they got Brogdon, Herb helped get that trade over the line, I think is the wording he used. So I think that's important, because if the story as told, and as we know, is all the facts about the Brogdon trade, then it is possible that anything the Pacers would do to get Ayton would require a sign and trade from Phoenix to Indiana. But I think there are some differences that are important here. One is that Brogdon was not a max guy at the time, right? He went for 4 years, $85 million. from the Bucks to the Pacers. And so here, this is the key difference to me. Yes, the Bucks would have been a mega tax team if they kept Brogdon, right? It didn't matter. They won the championship, but they did obviously work. But if the Bucks they could have kept Brogdon. They could have just signed him. And so they would have, yes, they would have gone deep into the tax, but maybe they were willing to pay him. And here's the difference. He wasn't a max guy. So they perhaps were willing to go up to a certain number up with his salary. And maybe they were willing to match. And then what Kevin Pritchard said is Herb gets us over the line. Maybe the Bucks are like, nope, if you're going to offer him this deal, we'll match. And then they said, okay, what about this? What if we do a sign and trade and give you stuff instead? And the Bucks are like, okay, then we don't have to do this restricted free agency dance. If we get assets back, we feel good about that. No, with Ayton, maybe that will again be the case. And maybe they get to this and Herb and Robert Sarver are on the phone and they say, what do we have to do to make this happen instead of you guys matching, blah, blah, blah. And the Suns, if they're willing to match up to the max, that's required. But the difference of the non-max and max guy is really important here because if there's no higher salary for Ayton to go to, like there was a way the Pacers could have just bid out over what the Bucks were willing to pay, but they didn't. They wanted to get it done at a salary that made sense, and the Bucks wanted to get it done too. There is nothing above the max, right? So I think that there is nothing that this is a little different. It's not the exact same thing where ownership would have to get involved and potentially and push this over the line. That said, if Herb still feels the same way about restricted free agency, that might force this to be in sign and trade. But if the Suns are not willing to match Ayton at the max, then that doesn't matter. The Pacers could just go, you know what? Let's just sign this guy. Because all these facts at play where everybody's calling it a sign and trade and trying to find creative ways to get around base year competition, that just doesn't make sense to me. I don't get why the Pacers should be rushing to give up valuable stuff, whatever it is, Miles Turner or a key young piece or a draft pick in the future, not number 6, in the future. Why the Pacers would be rushing to do these things to then have the opportunity to pay Deandre Ayton a ton of money. If you think Ayton's awesome and he's a positive value on a high contract, then you rush to do these things. You rush to give up assets to get him. And that's why, English, the Pacers would have been willing, in my head at least, as a cap guy and as someone who thinks about team building quite often, they would have been willing to do Sabonis for Ayton at the deadline. Because then they have Ayton on their team in this restricted free agency setting. They can sign him to the deal they want. The advantage difference is they have if you are the incumbent team, the Suns are the only team that can sign DeAndre Ayton to a 5-year deal. The Pacers can't. No one else can. Only the Suns can. And only the Suns can give him 8% raises. Even on a 4-year deal, Ayton's max with the Suns is $137 million. With the Pacers, it's $131, right? So there are advantages of him staying in Phoenix monetarily. Those advantages would have belonged to the Pacers had they traded for him at the deadline, right? That's why his value was higher in a trade than it is now because of restricted rights. Like the Pacers could have signed him for like 5 for $150, for example, if he was already on their team. And that's sub-max money every single year of the deal, but that 5th year means it's more money than any other team can give him. That's the advantage restricted free agency gives teams for these guys that are kind of on the line of max level. And that's why he would have cost more then. 1, because he was a cheap under control asset, but 2, the restricted rights go to the new team. Now that's not the case. You have to deal with these rights. So I've talked a lot about the factors at play here. And I think what's important to note is if Herb Simon was really, gung-ho about not wanting the restricted free agency process to be a hindrance for the Bucks and have all this terrible, annoying things happen for the Brogdon deal, perhaps that's relevant again, right? Perhaps he would not be okay with that again for Ayton, and then they'd have to do a sign and trade. But outside of that, I just don't, any Ayton to the Pacers rumor seems like it's just the Pacers signing him to a max deal because I don't get how they get him otherwise. A sub-max deal, the Suns match. A sign and trade with no ownership involvement doesn't make sense because the Pacers could just sign him. Why are they trading stuff away when they could just easily make 1 or 2 minor moves and just sign him? And 3, the last point I want to make here, this has nothing to do with all the points I've made so far. The Pacers right now are a cheap team with cap space. And next summer they will be again. And then they probably won't be for quite a while. And the reasoning for that is they're going to have to pay Tyrese Halliburton a bunch of money. They will eventually have to pay Chris Duarte a bunch of money. They have a 6th pick coming up who's expensive. They have Brogdon on the books. They could shuffle money around and get cheaper maybe 2 summers from now. But all this to say, they have definitely money this summer and most likely money next summer. And after that, Halliburton becomes a max guy, and I think Halliburton will be a max guy. And so if you're the Pacers front office, you have to really be thinking, you have 2 summers to figure this out, to figure out the team to get the expensive guy in. And maybe they want to do it now. But if you do it now and you mess up, or you don't know what makes the most sense around your current team, that's it. You're stuck. If you wait a year, get Halliburton in the right ecosystem, see what the right pieces are around him, see what fits well with him and number 6 pick or whatever they do, and Duarte involved. If you wait a year, you'll have more cap space, a better free agency class, a better idea of what you need, better stars available, a more in place ecosystem of the Pacers after a full season of having this guy. That makes more sense to me. Now, again, if you love someone, go get him, right? If they love DeAndre Ayton, then it makes sense for them to get him. But to me, it makes more sense for them to spend next summer because that's the last summer before Halliburton's max deal or whatever he gets would kick in. So signing Ayton now makes that not possible, right? That's it. That's their team. They are Ayton and Halliburton and Duarte and 6th pick, and they are hoping that all clicks. And maybe it does. But I don't think now is the time for the Pacers to spend. I don't think a sign and trade for DeAndre Ayton makes sense. I don't think the finances of just trading for Ayton make sense instead of just signing him. And I don't think it makes sense for the Pacers to be adding a max guy right now. And they don't have Domantas Sabonis on their team anymore, who was a key part of this trade in the first place. And the Suns can match any deal that the Pacers decide to offer. And there's other teams who want him, so he's going to be worth the max because there's competition. Here is a bunch of facts for you, listener. What do you think is going to happen? Because to me, there are a lot of facts and reports and cap implications that say Ayton to the Pacers this summer, not going to happen. Doesn't make sense. The only way it makes sense is if the Pacers absolutely love him and that their talks in February were a precursor to them trying to get him again. And if they absolutely love him and they're not willing to do the restricted free agency dance, maybe these sign and trades happen. But to me, they don't really make sense. In the same way that when they got Brogdon, I guess I got it when I learned that Herb Simon's involvement pushed over the line, but I still didn't really get why they had to sign and trade. So we'll see what happens. Do I think Ayton on the Pacers would be a good fit if he could cost any amount of money under the sun? Pretend he costs $10 million or whatever? Absolutely. He's good. He's a pretty damn good center. 17 points a game last season, good rebounder, decent touch around the basket. His defense is getting better throughout his career. Not great, but it's getting better, right? Solid gobbling up the boards guy, really efficient. 66% true shooting. Low mistakes guy. He's just kind of limited, right? He's got a one-legged fadeaway he goes to all the time. His defense is a little off, and he played on an awesome team with dudes, amazing setup players. Tyrese Halliburton's an amazing setup player too, but not to the extent that they had on that Suns team. So we'll see what happens here. We will see what happens here. But my opinion on this, and I think lining up all the facts, I don't think that Ayton is a guy that Pacers would pursue, but it's not impossible. It depends on what their priorities are and how their ownership feels about this process. One more guy that I got to talk about rumors for, and that's Russell Westbrook. Where did this one come from? Could anyone believe this when it came out for the first time in a Shams Charania piece in The Athletic? Where did this come from? What does it mean? Does it make any sense for the Pacers to be involved in a Russell Westbrook trade? Let's talk about it. Thank you again for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NBA to get the latest and greatest from around the league, including the Celtics. They're on to the finals. Celtics Warriors preview. I am dying for that show from Jackson Gatlin. It's going to be awesome. So let's talk about the Russell Westbrook part of this. This is completely unrelated to Ayton. This came out months ago. I've been avoiding talking about it, but this show is the perfect time to squeeze it in. Perfect time. Rumors show. So Shams Charania wrote a piece April 11th, the day after the season ended. What's next for the Lakers? They just fired their coach, finished the season without making the playoffs. Russell Westbrook trade did not work out for them. They fired Frank Vogel. How do they make a good team around LeBron? And so there were a lot of Westbrook rumors because, he was not good for them. He makes the most money in the entire NBA. He was not good for the Lakers. He did not fit their team ecosystem. He was part of the reason they were bad. And they would like to trade him. There were rumors they tried to trade him for John Wall during the season. It didn't end up happening. So this was before they hired a coach. And in Shams' piece, legendary NBA insider Shams Charania says the Indiana Pacers could emerge as a potential suitor for Westbrook. Rival executives believe, but any trade involving the former NBA MVP will be complicated due to his massive salary and the Lakers' next available first-round pick being in 2027. So let's cut this one up. Why do rival executives believe this, first of all? Second of all, it doesn't say that sources said the Pacers are interested in Westbrook or that the Lakers have pursued this avenue. It just says executives believe it. So why do executives believe this? Does this make any sense for the Pacers? Let's talk about it. So, key part number one here, Buddy Hield is on the Pacers. Key part number two here, the Pacers can have a lot of cap space this summer. Key part number three, the Pacers have some good veteran players who make healthy, strong salaries, but not really expensive salaries. Those are all key factors here. So let's talk about this. The Lakers want to trade Russell Westbrook for better role players who fit around LeBron and Anthony Davis. That's obvious. They even want a star player who makes a lot of money that could fit better on those two guys. So that is, I think, the reason that the rival executives mentioned in this piece linked Westbrook to the Pacers is because the Pacers have a ton of cap space. They are able to do lopsided trades, which means they take in way more salary than they send out, right? Because let's say I'm making up numbers. These aren't exact numbers, but these are possible numbers for the Pacers to achieve. Let's say at some point this summer they have $25 million in cap space, and then they trade away Malcolm Brogdon's $21 million contract in a trade. They can now take back $46 million in a deal because they have $46 million in space. It's not exactly like that, but it's basically like that. So for a team that's trying to trade Russell Westbrook, if you look at teams with cap space, you go, oh my gosh, we don't have to take back as much money. We can take back way less money. So Westbrook's going to make $47 million this coming season. So in my hypothetical scenario, it's not technically legal. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So the reason a team like the Pacers is named here is because they have cap space, which means the Lakers, could trade Westbrook to the Pacers and then get way less salary back. Just one veteran, for example, one of like Miles Turner or Buddy Hield or Malcolm Brogdon, and their salary troubles are solved, right? So the reason that makes sense is, the Pacers get involved here, and why the Pacers are named is because of the cap space teams. The Pacers have the vets that fit that billing. Most of the cap space teams this summer, the Spurs, the Pistons, the Trailblazers, they don't have these kind of vets that they're potentially at least, willing to part with to facilitate a deal like this. So that's part one of why rival executives have named the Pacers, is the cap space factor and the veterans factor. Number two is Buddy Hield, I think, specifically. Remember, the Lakers were really close to trading for Buddy Hield last year before they ended up trading for Westbrook. They clearly had interest in him and how he'd fit with LeBron and AD. Perhaps he could be the salary that makes something like this work. But number three here is the Lakers now have access to two future firsts, their 2027 first and their 2029 first. That sounds like really far away firsts in the future. They sound unappealing because it's the Lakers, who could be good at any moment because they can lure talent all the time. So I think those picks could be good, right? Like the Rockets got first round picks from the Nets, and they're from the James Harden trade. They're already getting top 20 picks from that. It's been like 2 years, right? That team had Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden, and the Rockets are already getting top 20 picks from that. You never know with future picks. Like I'm usually, as a trade thinker, I am willing to take a gamble on future picks. So the reason the Pacers are named by rival executives as a Russell Westbrook team, they have cap space, they have vets that make sense for the Lakers, maybe Brogdon, maybe Hield, maybe Turner, whatever. And they are in a rebuild, so getting these assets makes sense for them. And perhaps they just buy out Russell Westbrook and it's all over. But let's talk about this from the Pacers side. Rival executives see the Pacers as a good fit for obvious reasons. They have all those things I just said. But why would the Pacers do this? The Pacers taking back bad salary does make sense for them this summer. I know that's like an annoying thing for fans to think about, but it's not crazy to me that the Pacers summer is just some team dumps crappy salary on the Pacers. Pacers get some picks for it, and that's it. They don't sign anyone awesome. They take on some bad deals and they're done. And then they regroup next summer with more assets and a ton of space. And that makes this trade make some sense. But Russell Westbrook makes $47 million. I don't think the Pacers would be willing to pay that big of a buyout for a guy to not play on their team, first of all. Second of all, those assets really far in the future first, as much as I like them, are not necessarily the most valuable thing ever, especially from the Lakers. And I don't think that that's good value unless both picks are totally unprotected. If you can get two totally unprotected firsts, maybe this is fine. But like if you're trading Malcolm Brogdon, for example, for Russell Westbrook and two firsts, that's like not a good trade, right? You can get more for Brogdon than really crappy salary and some really far off, potentially protected firsts. Buddy Hield, maybe it makes sense. But then the Lakers probably aren't willing to part with two firsts for Buddy Hield. Like that's how you got to think about the value here for the Pacers. If Westbrook played a game for them next season, I'd be stunned. Even if a trade happens, I'd be stunned. It seems like a buyout waiting to happen. So I don't think this makes sense for the Pacers for a number of reasons. First of all, the asset reason doesn't make a lot of sense unless, again, they can get two unprotected first. Then maybe they think about it. But two, if this is going to happen without a buyout, Tyrese Halliburton's on the team. Chris Duarte is on the team. Those guys need the ball to develop and get better. Russell Westbrook does not help with that. He doesn't help teams in these settings very much at all. He needs the ball to be his very best, which is part of why he didn't work very well with the Lakers. He's not a good off-ball player. He's a great community guy. He's a great veteran teammate. For $47 million, You need more than that. He can't really give the Pacers more than that. And he's not a very Pacers-y player. That's a stupid reason to close with here, but that kind of star, that kind of trade is not very Pacers-y. They like to make trades for guys who are young or on a longer, valuable contract, and they can grow in with the franchise. And Russell Westbrook is none of those things. So here's why I think this rumor exists, or why rival executives like this, besides all the reasons I already said. I think you're going to see a lot of in the coming weeks. It's going to be June in 2 days. That is 1 month from free agency. I think you're about to see a lot of pieces that say something like executives believe, league sources believe, insiders believe, blah, 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 that the Pacers are going to be connected to strong free agents, right? This is a silly one because the Pacers aren't going to sign Zach LaVine. Like, they have max space. They could technically afford to, but they can't. They won't, right? He's going to go either back to the Bulls or to a winner. But there are odds makers putting out odds for Zach LaVine's next team, put the Pacers on these lists because they have cap space, right? It's already starting. So you're going to see a lot of articles that say, insiders believe, sources say, execs believe that the Pacers could be a fit for XYZ player who's really good. Zach LaVine, any other free agent who could fetch a lot of money this year. And the reason for that isn't necessarily because the Pacers have interest in that guy or because it makes sense for the Pacers to sign that guy, but because leverage exists. If teams think that the player they're trying to sign or re-sign has offers from somewhere else or is able to get these offers from somewhere else. And look, teams have a lot of intel too, but there's a lot out there. If they believe that they're going to have to pay more to get their guy, that's what it takes. And so these agents want to float this stuff, and sometimes teams want to float this stuff to inflate the value of players. And so every summer, teams with cap space are used for this, right? It is used as a tool for players to get more value potentially, to say, hey, this team with cap space could sign me to a big deal. Incumbent team with my bird rights, you better pay up or I'm going to leave. Even if they don't necessarily want to leave, they'll try that. And so the Pacers are going to get linked to a lot of these things. And that's kind of what I think the Westbrook thing is. They have a lot of space. They have pieces that make sense in this setting. And so everyone's saying, oh, the Pacers, there it is. It makes a lot of sense. There's a team. Maybe the Pacers can get 2 awesome firsts from the Lakers. If they're lightly protected or unprotected, yeah, this makes sense. But the Lakers probably don't want to do 2 unprotected firsts to get off Westbrook and get, a quality vet who isn't amazing. Not that Buddy Hield and Malcolm Brogdon aren't awesome players. They're not like world-beating players or huge game changers or anything. So this doesn't seem like a good fit to me. It doesn't seem like there's a trade that makes sense for the Pacers and the Lakers. Russell Westbrook doesn't make sense for the Pacers. It just seems like these teams are kind of in good situations where it seems like a trade makes sense because of the high-level look at both teams. With a more granular look at both sides and what their goals would be, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But expect to see a lot of that stuff. I will not be covering rumors unless I think they're credible. And I don't think the Ayton thing necessarily makes sense for the Pacers this summer. But it was a lot of credible insiders talking about it in February. I wanted to talk about it again. I don't think the Russell Westbrook thing is credible, but I wanted to bring it up in this setting to explain why a lot of these rumors will be connected to the Pacers and why that trade specifically is out there. And I had a segment to fill on the Ayton show. So it worked out really well. Hope everybody had an awesome Memorial Day weekend. If you went to the 500, I hope you really enjoyed it. Beautiful weather. Absolutely beautiful weather. I hung out with my family. I did not go to the race. Beautiful weather. If you're enjoying a Memorial Day off, I hope you're having an awesome day. Thanks for letting me be a part of it for over half an hour. That's awesome. Tomorrow, free agency again. We'll be looking at TJ Warren Summer. That's an interesting one. What does it make sense for the Pacers to bring him back at? Why would teams pursue or not pursue him after his injuries? What will his options be? All that sort of stuff tomorrow. The last player season recaps on Wednesday. Only 3 more players to do. And then we're right back into draft stuff and Lockdown crossover. Lockdown Kings this week, talking about a potential trade of pick 4 and pick 6 with Matt George of Lockdown Kings. He's the best. So lots of awesome content coming this week. Hope everybody had an awesome weekend. And if you're still on your weekend, hope everybody's having an awesome weekend. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow.